it's Alyssa, your favorite awkward author, with the video that I first made last week and which my computer ate, so now I'm redoing everything. Interestingly enough, using the 21st century excuse that's equivalent to the old my dog ate my homework, my computer ate my homework excuse. This is a video about school, about how you learn to write when you're in school, and how a lot of lessons that at least I was taught when I was in school turned out to be not at all helpful, and in fact were pretty much the opposite of what you should do as a writer. So that's something that happens once you get out there in the world and you start to actually learn about writing, whether it's through reading books about writing or reading books in general, or reading, blog posts or forums or, submission guidelines. You're going to have to unlearn some of the things that you learned when you were in school. One of the earliest writing lessons that I can remember from when I was in school, I think we were in 4th grade, and we did a very formal unit on the death of said. We even had a bulletin board in our classroom with a tombstone, a construction paper or bulletin board paper or whatever you want to call it, tombstone, and it said and like rest in peace, and surrounding it were all these words that you could use instead of said. And so those are, different dialogue tags other than said. Chirped and barked and hissed. And I'm talking about people here, not animals. Things like chided and opined and exclaimed, exhorted and quipped. Yeah, don't use these. Despite what I was taught in 4th grade, said is actually a very good word. It's a perfectly fine word. And if you find yourself replacing said with other words, if you find yourself resorting to the use of a thesaurus to figure out what to replace said with, you're doing it wrong. In most cases, said is the right word for the job. And all these other silly, ridiculous words actually get in the way of your writing. They draw the reader out of the story. They interrupt the flow of dialogue. They just make for bad writing overall. So while my 4th grade teacher did seem to have some sort of vendetta against said, I would like to urge you to resurrect said from the grave. Just use said, okay? Forget about my 4th grade teacher, who was wrong. Okay, something else that I was taught in school, and I don't really have a specific memory of a teacher saying this is what you should do, but I do remember multiple units on it, so I think we were taught this in different years of school. And that was to use adverbs, and by adverbs I'm talking about the ones that end in ly, like strongly and specifically and messily and crazily and, well, any word that ends in ly. Save these for your Mad Libs games, but in most cases they don't belong in your manuscript. You can use adverbs occasionally, sparingly. Yes, I know those are adverbs, but more than that, if you're finding that there's an adverb in every single paragraph that you write, get out that red pen and start crossing them out, because you're using way too many of them. Adverbs, like dialogue tags, just kind of draw readers out of the story, and they don't allow the story to speak for itself. They're basically a perfect example of telling instead of showing. If you need to tell your readers that your character did something messily, you're doing it wrong. The character's actions and behavior should speak for themselves, and if your readers cannot tell that your character is doing something messily, then adding the word messily doesn't really fix your manuscript. You gotta go back and look at it and make it better and get your point across without relying on adverbs, which are kind of a crutch. They're make for bad writing. And of course the worst sin of all is to use an adverb with a ridiculous dialogue tag, so, she chortled mercilessly or something like that. That would be the kiss of death. If you want to get rejected by editors and agents, by all means, use the phrase, she chortled mercilessly. And finally, another lesson, which was not like an overt lesson, but it's something that you kind of pick up when you're in school, is that quantity is more important than quality. And basically every time we had a writing assignment in school, and I'm talking all the way up through college, the assignment always had a specified number of pages that the project had to be. And while I understand why teachers and professors do this, it doesn't necessarily make for good writing. What ends up happening in a lot of cases, students know how to do things like, change font sizes and change margin sizes, and there are some teachers and professors who are astute enough to recognize such things or to make very clear rules about, the size of the font and the size of the margins. But then beyond that, what students do is they figure out ways to stretch out what they have to say. To put it bluntly, they BS. It's very easy, actually, to put all kinds of meaningless filler sentences and words into a manuscript or into a paper to stretch it out to the specified 3 to 5 pages, or 6 to 10 pages, or whatever your assignment's requirement is. And so you put in these extra words, you put in sentences that don't need to be there because you've kind of already made that point. You really clutter up your writing with all this stuff. One great tip for new writers when they're going back and editing over a first draft or a second draft is to look for unnecessary words, and a good killer word is "that." We use it when we talk, but in our manuscripts we sometimes use it when we don't need it at all. And if you took out most of the "that's" from a manuscript, it would still have the same exact meaning and it wouldn't be so cluttered up with words. The goal is not to sound like a lawyer writing a legal disclaimer. Lawyers do not know how to say things, sorry Dad, in clear ways. Their language, if you've ever read a legal disclaimer, we usually don't read them. We see them all the time on websites and we just say, yeah, we read it, I agree to it. Because there's no way we can read it all. It's this big, huge, long thing of nonsense. And that is not what you want your manuscript to read like. You want people to actually read it. And they will actually read it instead of skipping over and say, yeah, I read it. If there's something worth reading there, and if it's not filled up with all these nonsense sentences that stretch it out and get it to, whatever page count. The goal when you are writing is to say things in as little words as possible and to be as clean and spare in your writing as you can, but while still being descriptive and telling a great story. One classic writer who I think does an awesome job of this, and that is because he was a merciless editor of his own work, merciless, is F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you read any of his manuscripts, you will see how tightly they are written. The Great Gatsby is a great book, it's a classic book, and it is crazy short. And so while you might not be able to be quite as good an editor as F. Scott Fitzgerald, who, may I remind you, used a typewriter, did not have a computer with a word processing program where he could easily cut and paste. He had to type out his things and manually cut and paste. So that's even more impressive. Your goal should be to cut out anything that is extraneous and doesn't add to the story. This is something I have a problem with NaNoWriMo, when it's so focused on word count. That should not really be your goal. I mean, you have to have a substantial amount of words for something to be a novel, but your goal should be to tell the story in as few words as possible, not in as many words as possible. That's really the opposite of how you want to write. And unfortunately, that's something we have to unlearn because of what we learn when we're writing in school and, when we're given assignments that say, it has to be 3 to 5 pages or it has to be 6 to 10 pages. You should get a better grade if you turn in a 3 to 5 page, an assignment that's supposed to be 3 to 5 pages and you were able to say exactly everything that needs to be said in 2 pages. That's a bigger feat than taking 5 pages to say it, but that's not how it works in school. And that's why maybe I'm not a huge fan of school. I mean, I went, and I think teachers do a good job, as good as they're able to, but don't think that school is the end-all be-all for learning. And you can learn a lot on your own, and in terms of writing, the best way to learn how to write is 1, to write, and 2, to read. And that's what you need. And unfortunately, for teachers, it's very difficult to teach writing. That's something you have to learn yourself, and you will learn that better, I think, yourself than with anyone teaching you. So yeah, that's my ranting ramble, which hopefully this week my computer doesn't eat. If for some reason my computer does eat it, I'm just going to assume the world does not want to know about writing and school and my thoughts on the two. Okay guys, I put out awkward author videos every Tuesday, unless my computer eats them, in which case I might have to skip a week. Yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, leave a comment below, or give a thumbs up on this video, or share it with your friends. Okay guys, I will be back next week, barring any technological difficulties.